It's 4 o'clock. Let's call our meeting to order. Harry, can you call the roll, please?
Sure. Mr. Ebro?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Schneider?
Here.
Mr. Kepla? Here. Mr. Boardman? Here. The two alderpersons, Mr. Fisher, Mr. Witzel, and GM's here, and staff.
Thank you. Nick, has the meeting been appropriately noticed?
Yes, the meeting was noticed, was posted here at our office, also sent to City Hall and the library for posting, and then also went out to various media outlets.
Thank you. Public comment period. At this time, the commission would recognize members of the public who've indicated a desire to address the commission. Upon recognition by the commission, persons may take up to 3 minutes to address the commission for stating their name and address. The commission may take action on emergency actions, matters introduced by members of the public. Do we have any public comments today? Seeing none. Commissioner, council, and staff comments. Commissioners, anything?
None.
I would share that the utility received a letter of thanks from the New Smyrna Beach utilities down in Florida for the recent help after the storm through the mutual aid program. So some appreciation there. Council members, any comments? Staff comments?
Yeah, we have a few. Tony?
Right, just a quick update. So ATC has some planned work at their Arpit substation, late November into early December. So November 29th to December 1st, and then December 6th to the 8th, they're going to be taking one of their transformers offline to replace some breakers. What that means for us is that we'll be radio link fed from the north. So while there's very limited exposure to us, there is still the chance that if there's an event, storm, car accident, something like that, between here and Stratford, it would actually then black out the city. We've not had any instances of operations though on that circuit, so we don't really expect anything. It's just something to be aware of.
Knock on wood, right?
Thank you.
And then two additional items. One, a few months ago, we started talking about KPIs. Just want to let you know we've made some progress on that and plan to bring that back to the commission. Just tonight's agenda was a little long, so we'll kick that to either December or first part of next year. And then the second item is the Common Council is currently has gone through a process, completed the first review of an ordinance, and I think the second review is a week from tomorrow, next Tuesday. And the ordinance change will change the makeup or the potential makeup of this body. It'll provide the Common Council an opportunity to appoint individuals that are served by Marshfield Utilities, so not necessarily a resident. And Tom or Adam, please feel free to add. And then I think there's an additional component to that that the majority of this board, though, still shall be maintained as city residents. And I don't know if I captured that correctly or if there's anything else to add.
I didn't have anything else to add.
It's pretty much my understanding.
Yep.
Okay. So that's it.
Okay. Number 5, employee service recognition.
Yes, on October 23rd, Reynold Poshek celebrated 5 years in our water department as a water operator.
Okay, thank you. Number 6, PFAS engineering report.
Tonight on Zoom we have Miles Jensen. He's with SEH. He's here to kind of go through the preliminary results from the PFAS engineering report that was included in the packet. If you remember a few months ago, the body authorized us to move forward with that report development. So I guess I'll kind of turn it over to Miles to let him jump in.
Oh, you're muted right now, Miles.
There we go. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for that. I appreciate the opportunity to address the body here. So as you know, earlier this year, the utility voluntarily participated with DNR on water sampling of their wells, in particular Wildwood and the South well fields. And sadly, what came of that is detection of PFAS, PFOA type substances that we've been hearing about in the news of waste. Wisconsin Department of Health has an advisory level that they set of 20 nanograms per liter. So, you know, we're getting down in there into the parts per trillion realm. And then the DNR is pushing for a maximum contaminant level right now of 70 nanograms per liter. So given that backdrop, there's a table in the report that shows the distribution of the water quality results. Needless to say, the utility elected to put the south well field, rather than in its primary position, because it is the least cost water to use, to supply the distribution system. They ratcheted it down into one of the lower settings, less likely to be used until a plan could be established. So what SEH did was to look at an analysis for different alternatives to handle the water either from Wildwood or from south. The alternatives that we looked at included treatment as well as new well fields or replacement wells. In regard to the treatment really came down, you know, the current technology has really come down to granular activated carbon, which is canisters full of carbon that work like sponges to suck all the contaminants out of the water, pretty much like a giant Brita filter that you've seen. AIX, so it's an anion exchange. This is like a home water softener where you put salt brine into the resin bead. This is, rather than being a cation exchanger like it would be for softening, it pulls out the anions, which would then pull out the various PFAS chains. And then reverse osmosis. The only thing about reverse, so with granular activated carbon and AIX, the contaminants stick to the media, and then the media over time needs to be replaced. With reverse osmosis, it's merely taken out of the flow stream and put into a reject flow stream, which would then, in this case, would go to a waste treatment facility or would need to go to a holding tank. And that didn't seem like the most appropriate method, because it seems like we're just kicking the can down the road for somebody else to deal with. So moving forward, we put together cost estimates and life cycle costs for granular activated carbon, permanent removal facility at south, same with an anion exchange, and then with a well field replacement. At Wildwood, the same technologies would apply, but there is 0.14 milligrams per liter of manganese, and so with the presence of manganese, it would tend to coat the media, the PFAS removal media, whether it's gas or if it's granular activated carbon or anion exchange. So with Wildwood, you would need to install iron and manganese removal ahead of the PFAS removal media. And then, of course, replacement of the wells. So then, going through the analysis, and you saw that on the screen, or excuse me, not on the screen, but in the report. What we learned is that the south well field, if you were to replace the well field, of course, that is considerably more money than merely putting in a PFAS removal equipment. Somewhere around $9 million in project cost, whereas PFAS treatment, and I'm looking at another screen here, is around $5 million for capital cost. And then the annual cost would be about $550,000. that's at South. And then at Wildwood, you know, it makes a little bit more sense in this regard to consider replacing those two wells and constructing them either at South or where they would be pumped to your existing water treatment plant. And then the last item that came up was to install an interim treatment process. The utility has received quotation from one company to, on a temporary basis, put in an anion exchanger, so the same technology we were looking at, but bring it in on a temporary basis inside a insulated and heated refrigerator semi, if you will, so that to get the treatment up and running quicker, and that the utility could return the South Wellfield to a higher priority status. That interim treatment would also give opportunity for the utility to learn more about technology moving forward that could be implemented down the road. We're expecting that the proposed media for the temporary facility would last somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 years, and with one change out, now you buy yourself, up to 5 or 6 years of time to develop a strategy for the permanent removal facility. At the same time, we'd be able to address construction of the wells, the replacement of the wells at Wildwood, and improvements to the filter media at the water treatment plant. So it seems like the interim treatment process buys the utility a little bit of time and spreads out the cash flow a little bit on the permanent solution. And I'll take questions or anything you may have.
Questions? John?
On the replacement of the wells at the Wildwood, that's assuming you abandon the 2 wells that are there, and then drill new ones somewhere else. Is there a pretty good guarantee then that those new wells are gonna stay PFAS free?
No, so here's our thinking there. You're absolutely right. And so if you consider the South Wellfield, for instance, the one thing that we do know there is that water quality, absent of the PFAS, is pretty darn high quality. And to that point, PFAS removal, it doesn't need to be preceded by any iron or manganese or any other sort of treatment. Right now, there's an aerator there that is just raising the pH, driving the carbon dioxide out, and that helps to stabilize the water in the distribution system. And then at the treatment plant, I'm not aware that the wells there have encountered elevated PFAS, and so to drill a well in that area still seems like a pretty good option for replacement of one of the Wildwood wells.
Paul, did you have a question?
Yeah, just kind of a follow-up on that. So replacement of the Wildwood wells is pretty much to avoid the manganese problem. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I missed that part. I apologize.
Is the replacement at Wildwood primarily then going to just, based on the fact that that would eliminate the manganese problem?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, if you were to put a well, replacement well at South, you don't have to deal with the manganese issue. And then if you were to put a well that would pump to the water treatment plant, well, you already have a manganese removal process there.
Okay.
And just to add on to that, it's also a cost component. So it's instead of putting treatment in at Wildwood, it's more economical as long as we're able to find wells near a transmission main, to put new wells in. So that's the first solution for Wildwood.
I guess I had a similar question as John. Do we know the source of the PFAS in the two wells?
No.
No?
No. I mean, you have, Wildwood both have, trace amounts, and then Southside has amounts as well. So it's, we weren't able to identify any one source that could be contributing or has contributed.
Is there any way that we can identify it, or is that?
In the communities that we've, and John add into this, but some of the communities that we've seen that have had this, they've had a known source. So like in Madison, it was near the airport, and they used that foam in the airport fighting means. Here, our airport has not used foam historically, so it's not an issue there. In the Pestigo area and others, they were actually producing products that had PFAS. They were actually producing PFAS, and they were letting that go outside the business, basically, and polluting the ground. Here, there's no single culprit that we can kind of point to from a historical perspective or even a current perspective that's a generator of that chemical, or chemicals, I should say, strain of chemicals.
So does that have bearing on construction of a new well?
I think it has to be part of the consideration, yeah. I think as, we have a single aquifer, so I think one of the concerns is, right now we're dealing with Southside and Wildwood. I can't tell you what's going to happen in the future, but it's possible we may have more treatment that needs to be added to help mitigate all sources everywhere. But right now, I think as Miles said, Wildwood, I think the most economical solution and the best long-term is to basically walk away from that facility and look at new wells. Southside, we feel that, it's advantageous to get a temporary solution online, knowing that the resin inside of a temporary solution will last about 2 to 3 years, and do that for at least 2 cycles, so that we can get maybe 5 to 6 years down the road. In between now and then, hopefully the standards firm up, the treatment, the potential solutions and how things are treated firm up, and we'd be in a better spot in a couple of years to make a permanent solution, and then we just continue to use that temporary until then.
That makes sense.
Nick, you had mentioned that there's a single aquifer. Does that mean for Marshfield, no matter where you get your water, it comes from the same aquifer?
It's all connected.
We have multiple aquifers. We have 15 different wells. Some of them pull from the same aquifer, like Southside. All 4 of those wells are probably from a single aquifer. Wildwood, those 2 wells, the 8 and 10, are probably from a single aquifer, but different from Southside. Then we have others throughout the northern part of the community that have different aquifers in themselves. 21, 22, and 23 are kind of in the McMillan Marsh area. They're probably drawing from the same water source. 19, 20, 24 are probably drawing from a different water source, but they're drawing from the same water source. And 17, 26, and 18 are probably drawing from a different water source. Kind of these giant bowls of sand that we found doing geographic sounding in the past when they found those pockets. So they're separated aquifers, but within certain wells they're drawing from the same aquifer. Yes.
Thanks.
But it's not one giant lake, it's just a bunch of little puddles.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
If we abandoned the Wildwood wells, what is our remaining cost that we would be abandoning there? How significant is that for the ratepayer in addition to the cost of new well construction? Any sense?
We have not analyzed the remaining book value, the undepreciated portion of the existing Wildwood. That facility is relative, I don't know the age of it, if you guys know off the top of your head.
I would say very old, though. It functions with wells 8 and 10, and all wells are numbered sequentially. So as we're up to 26 now, 8 and 10 were put in long, long ago. I'd have to look it up to see if I'm missing. Well number 6 was put in 1947. So it's probably in the 50s that wells 8 and 10 went in, more than likely.
So they're fully depreciated out. More
More
likely.
than likely, yes.
Yeah. Obviously, any new wells, just like any capital investment, is going to have that side of it. I think that's one of the challenges as we've been talking. When we get into the budget, you'll see, and that's part of the reason we've been, like the budget's set up one way, but that way we need to have this conversation is that there's a number of different opportunity or directions we can go here, and obviously each one of them have their different, pros and cons. That's obviously if we do the temporary solution and run it longer, obviously there's more expense, operating expense, and less capitalization because of it being a temporary facility. So those are some of the conversations we're starting to have with the PSC and also with the DNR to understand what they will allow and not allow as it relates to how it's classified, and then obviously how it has an impact on rates down the road as well. I think long-term, one of the things that's in the report that's interesting is, once even if it's a permanent solution in place, you're talking $100,000 to $150,000 annually in resin costs. That's a sizable expense compared to if you look at our income and such. So, unfortunately, it's a part to this problem we have to deal with.
I got was just one more question. The EPA hasn't weighed in on this quite yet, correct? We're getting these numbers, parts per trillion, from the DNR, Wisconsin. The EPA is going to give a determination sometime in the future. Would that change what Wisconsin might do?
Well, I think that it certainly could change what Wisconsin might do, and so, the temporary solution does allow for some time. I think that the rules are supposed to come out in 24, if I'm right on that. So, but I will say that I think that Wisconsin is on the right path as far as getting something in place, something that allows people to react to. Do I think that it's going to stay there? No, I don't know if it will or not. It may come down a little bit. Who's to say in that regard? But at least they're giving people something to shoot at now.
To your point, John, though, we have some regulation, but it's not a complete firm regulation. So making this temporary solution will get us to a point where then we'll know the firm requirements and then act accordingly.
Yeah, my point is it just seems like it's a moving target yet.
It is.
We're trying to zero in on it, but we don't know where it's going to.
Hence the temporary solution.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
And another, sorry, Nate, another piece of that puzzle, we're hearing other communities, they do their initial testing and they have levels here. And in some cases, they've done testing now after the fact, after they put in treatment, and they found that the source water, the levels have actually increased. So the resin is all based on the concentration level, so it doesn't last as long. So those are all, all pieces that can change over time.
Exactly, yeah.
See the levels
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think moving forward a temporary facility now will give everybody an opportunity to see how the technology performs. And what we're all concerned about is what's coming out at the end of the pipeline. And so the temporary facility will just really buy us more time to understand just how they are working and, how close they are to being addressing the level that DNR sets, of course, but, will also give us an idea on how to react to the final EPA numbers as well.
Two questions, and I think it's for John. On well number 25, if they're pulling from the same source, how come it's so much higher? Like 101 compared to 7 for well number 10?
It's all from the same source. That doesn't mean the pollution is homogeneous. It might be that the source is somewhere closer to 25, and so the water direction is pulled that way. We have learned from other communities that have similar sources where they tried shutting down just that well and leaving the others around it go because they were under the limits, and they pulled the plume that way. So it's not, there's no mixer down there making sure everything is mixed up really nice, so the plume is probably closer to that well, is why that's more concentrated.
Gotcha. Especially more towards the one at Wildwood, just under 4 parts per trillion. Is it known or is it just hypothetical, the health risks right now?
Well, there's studies out there, and the EPA has provided their health, what's the level, what's it called, John?
The health advisory?
Health advisory limit. I don't know if the latest one has gone to, I know it's been submitted, I don't know if it's been fully peer reviewed or not. If you want some nighttime reading, I'd encourage looking at it. It is very interesting how they use techniques they use in their analysis to weigh and indicate how much water is consumed in your body versus in drinking water versus in food prep, and just trying to work through all of that to then come up with a level. So it's not as simple as the test that we're doing to say that's what it is for them to set that health limit. And keep in mind that the health limit doesn't necessarily mean what the MCL will be, the maximum containment limit, that is that we have to test the water to. Like for instance, if you look at lead obviously it's, from a health perspective is 0, we should have none. However, the current regulation is 15. While it's going through subject to change now in the recent time, but it goes through a process.
Yeah.
There's a lot of factors that have to be weighed.
So nobody really knows. So it kind of seems like what I read up on.
Whether there's a direct health risk from it, I don't think they've completely established that, but they're regulating how much of it can go into you anyway.
Yeah, gotcha.
Just a note on the temporary installation, just to give you, I don't know if this was mentioned, but it's essentially a semi-trailer.
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure if that was mentioned.
We talked about that last time. Okay. Other questions for Miles or on this topic? I'm curious, Miles, I don't know if you have this handy, but as an engineer, can you help me visualize what this 4 parts per trillion looks like? I mean, if I've got a swimming pool, how many gallons of the swimming pool are the bad stuff?
You know what? I think in a swimming pool, I don't even know if you could physically put a drop in there. 1 drop, I think, would send you way over the limit.
Joe Grande from Madison does a presentation on this, and he brings in a vial that's like this big, and he says that is enough PFAS to contaminate Lake Wingrod in Madison at 1 part per trillion. And it's not even a full vial. That's this, it's the size of my pinky, and he says that's enough. So the physical amount is not much to contaminate at parts per trillion. Not much at all.
So thanks, Miles.
Pretty cool. You want to get that 1 part.
All right. Any other comments on this? Thank you, John.
I guess there's one last one for now.
Yeah.
Is it the newer testing equipment that can actually detect it, and possibly it's always been there, or it's just more recently coming through the water systems? Like, does anybody know if it actually was there 100 years ago, and we just couldn't test it that parts per trillion to even see it?
Well, I think PFAS has been around since the 1940s, so that's when it was introduced and being produced.
Okay.
So I think that's the origination of it, if you will. And then, over time, testing technology has gotten better to get to now parts per trillion. I think in UCMR 3 was...
Back in 2013, we did test for it.
But that was parts per billion, I think.
Parts per billion, yes. And at our levels, we had no detect. But then when they were able to test at parts per trillion, we had now had detects. So yeah, if we were still at the parts per billion level at the results that we had, we'd still be showing up as no detects. But now if they can get to that, we can definitely detect it. That was 2013 was the first year we've ever had to test for that stuff. Nobody even asked us to test for it. Nobody really knew it was in the water supply, so to speak. So how long it's been there, it's hard to say.
And PFAS occur not just in water. According to my research, it's in like candy wrappers or fast food containers or cosmetics, lipstick.
Yeah.
Anything that has a stain resistantness to it, whether it's a fabric, carpet, Teflon frying pans, anything non-stick stain kind of related stuff, has got some sort of PFAS component to it.
Are they in that parts per trillion levels then too? Like,
Well, I think with the food wrapper portion of things, they banned that. So you can't do that anymore, but they didn't have any detection of it before, you know, it was most recently banned. So, you know, like one of the big hits was microwave popcorn bags
Yeah.
were high in that stuff. But as far as like in the fabrics and whatnot, there's no regulation there because you're in theory not ingesting that. But one could make the case every time you roll around in your pillow, you know, and breathe it in. Maybe, I don't know. I would say there's a risk there. Yeah.
Pretty.
Not to foreshadow, but firefighting foam as well.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. Moving on, we're going to skip over number 7 and move that down to 11.5 so that it fits in and makes more sense. So we'll go on to number 8, firefighting foam trailers or trailers.
Yes. So to help protect the fuel oil storage at the power plant in 2010, MU purchased and donated 2 foam trailers to the Marshfield Fire Department. The trailers included 2 totes full of foam for controlling a fire. The trailers could also be used to fight fuel-related fires in central Wisconsin, as there's very few of these types of trailers in the area. Unfortunately, the foam is made with PFAS, and while the foam could be used today if an emergency was needed, the challenge really comes down to cleaning it up and who's responsible and any potential impact in the environment. So this essentially makes the current foam that we have with PFAS useless. The fire department and our staff have worked together and are have been qualified for a disposal grant from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. The grant will essentially cover the totes and the foam that we have on site as well. It's about a $10,000 savings to us, and then probably another $50,000 or so for the totes on the trailers. This disposal is going to occur later this year. So not having the foam for the trailers creates a risk for MU due to our fuel storage. The estimated cost for replacement foam and the cleaning of the current trailers is approximately $52,000. We bring this for your consideration, and I'd just like to recognize we have Chief Pete Floody and Deputy Chief Jody Clemens. They're both joining us from the Fire and Rescue Department, and they're very knowledgeable, and I don't know if they have anything they'd like to add, feel free.
Just if you have questions on the history or anything like that, just let us know. Nick, the only one thing I think you said there's 2 totes. There's 2 trailers with 2 totes each.
Yeah, thanks for so 4 totes total. Are they 300 gallon each?
275 gallons in each tote.
Have we ever used that type of stuff on a fire at all in Marshfield?
Not the trailers, but we have used foam in the history of the department, yes.
Okay.
I think you carry on your trucks small 5-gallon buckets used for like if there's a car crash or something smaller.
Right.
Unfortunately, we haven't had to use the larger equipment yet.
But it seems like this is pretty much required for the M1 plant.
Yeah, I mean, I bring this forward thinking that obviously there's a risk there, and either we support the fire department in getting non-PFAS foam, or we have to figure out an alternative, so that because they wouldn't have necessarily the apparatus to do the job.
Nick, the one thing too is that the way that the current laws are is that if the radical choice would be if we don't want to keep this foam. That's fact. But if for some reason we would have foam with PFAS in it and we'd have an incident, number one, if we would use it and knowingly use something with PFAS in it, we would be known as the spiller. So we would be liable for any damages that would take place. So obviously, we don't want to have that burden on our department and the city. So that would be Granted, the 2 tanks that we are protecting do have containment, but just remember when you're spraying foam, not everything is going to go into that containment, and will be able to be cleaned up. So obviously, that's not really a realistic alternative, dealing with this, being able to get it disposed of via the grant and everything, and then trying to get PFAS-free foam in. And I could, if you wanted to talk about how we came to the conclusion to find the foam that we would recommend, if you're interested in that, I could let you know that too.
Curious what the shelf life of the replacement foam is if it goes unused.
Yes. So the current the manufacturer of this, because this is a biodegradable foam, the manufacturer says after 10 years, they said you want to have it tested. My question to them is, what does that entail? And I have not got that. I have not got that response back. They just basically said that it could be a functional test or anything like that, but 10 years is the recommended life of it. After that, it would have to be tested to find out its effectiveness.
Thank you. Other questions?
In the cost estimate, though, we have firm cost for the foam totes, the 4 totes. We have a firm cost for cleaning of the current trailer equipment. And we have the one part that's a variable in there is the shipping cost. So as you consider any action, I would ask that you provide just a slight flexibility just due to the variability that relates to the shipping cost. If that makes sense.
Yeah, the estimated total cost, at least what we have, says for foam and cleaning is $50,755. Is that with some shipping in there, the 1,800 listed, or is that shy of any shipping?
I'm sorry. Let me double check.
I'll throw out a number, but I need to know what I'm basing it on.
Yeah. Yep. So the $50,755 includes the $10,995 per tote times 4, $1,800 of estimated for shipping, and the $4,975 for cleaning.
Okay, so it includes initial 1,800.
Correct.
What would you suggest a cushion be in the shipping in terms of an amount?
I would say like 52 or 53 if you're going to do everything.
Yeah. Okay.
Just to be safe.
Comment here?
I was just going to say that in talking to them about the shipping, if we ordered it by November 11th, the cost was $1,000. Then between that and the 26th, it was $1,800. And I've been told that before Christmas there's going to be a bump, and then after Christmas there's going to be a bump universally. But I would agree with Nick. I'm just saying that it's too big of a variable. He wouldn't even go out farther than the 26th, because he said that the shipping, they're not giving him estimates after that.
I think this is something we should support. So I would make a motion that we support the replacement of foam at a cost not to exceed $53,000.
We have a motion by Paul to support that for up to $53,000 as presented by Nick. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Harry. Did you have a comment?
Just to clarifying the motion that, and to take the funds from the commission designated fund?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I heard him say that.
I kind of thought that's where it was, but I didn't say it, but that's okay. Yeah, from the commission designated fund.
When we say 53,000?
$53,000.
Motion by Paul, second by Harry. Is there any discussion, questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Number 9, lead service review.
Yes, so in the packet, we provided an update on the lead service replacement. Thus far, with 2 years complete in lead service replacement, we've replaced 632 total lead services and goosenecks. This is averaging annually about 316. And this in general exceeds the 168 that's required nearly by 2 times. So I just want, before I get into the next part, I just want to commend John and his team for all their hard work on this, because it's not a small project by any means, and they're obviously, I think they're hitting it out of the park and getting these replaced as quickly as possible. So, thank you guys. So during recent communication with the DNR staff, they indicated to us that goosenecks are not included in the program and just need to be replaced as they are found. We did ask for confirmation, and we did receive that earlier this afternoon. So if goosenecks are not included in the annual replacement requirement, that drops us to around 95 replacements that are due annually. Reducing the quantity required and completed annually would help us balance resources to support this project, along with PFAS and the water treatment facility filter sand project as well. So the reason we brought this forth to the commission is to understand, how we should pivot, or if we should pivot as it relates to this replacement going forward, since goosenecks now are not replaced. Gooseneck replacement is not required at this time. And I do want to stress, at this time, the DNR contact did say that based on the current requirements, it's not, but obviously it's always subject to change at any point in the future. I can't tell you, John and I are at a loss of how we got to where we are. There were multiple times where he or I contacted the DNR in submitting over the last 2 years, and at no point did anyone ever question the goosenecks or give us this guidance until most recently with the submittal that John did. So.
Thoughts?
Just to add a little bit more flavor to consider, obviously when we're pushing over 300 a year, we've talked about it on the balance sheet and obviously in our financials how it's had an impact. If that number is somewhat reduced, obviously that puts us in a better spot financially. Obviously we have a number of things on the plate with PFAS and, like I said, the filter sand as well. So just trying to balance all those items at once. I think our goal still is to continue to move forward as quickly as we can. Just trying to make sure we have the right target in mind as we go forward.
Is it safe to assume that there's a significant cost difference between just replacing a gooseneck and a full lead service replacement?
I would say that depends on your definition of significant. I would say, in my mind, comparatively speaking, it's not much. Because the gooseneck is at the main, which is underneath the street pavement 99% of the time. So there's a significant cost digging up that section. And whether you replace the gooseneck or you have to do the full lead service, that section of pavement is always going to come up. The rest of it, if you do it by pulling it, you don't have to open cut the whole way. The rest of it, you're digging in the terrace, and you may lose some curb, maybe not, maybe lose some sidewalk, maybe not. But either or is much cheaper than the hole in the street, right? So yes, there's some more additional cost over there, but compared to the excavation in the street, it's not as much, right? So you're maybe adding another $1,000. Well, the initial hole is probably a $5,000 investment. The other hole is probably only about $1,000. So yes, it's additional cost, but comparatively speaking, it's not a lot.
Okay.
So if goosenecks don't count in the program, does that mean we aren't changing them out?
I think that's what they're looking for guidance on.
Up until this season, through this construction season until last
I
week,
know we did.
we were,
Yeah.
and have been.
Why would we want, I know the cost, but why would we want to leave lead in there, period?
We're just bringing it forth for your consideration and discussion. Ultimately, the DNR has changed their approach on what's required. I think long-term, yes, removing it. What the DNR has told us on goosenecks is that if you find it, you need to replace it. But you don't have to actively seek them out, is their approach right now.
So if we found it, we still would?
Oh, yeah. If there's a main break, or if there's a road project next year that's like
Yeah.
17th Street this year where there's a light gooseneck,
Yeah.
we're going to replace it. Because
Makes
obviously
sense.
it's I would say pennies on the dollar, but obviously much
Yeah.
less to do it in that regards.
Does a gooseneck have a more of a bigger failure rate than not a gooseneck? If you had, a gooseneck and you're out there and you didn't have one, do they fail More?
They are a significant failure point if what's called the lead wipe is still the connection point. And the lead wipe is about a tennis-sized ball of lead. That's how they used to join lead to other lead pipes or lead to copper pipes. They'd have a kind of asbestos glove, and they would mold the molten lead around the pipe, joining them together. And you'd end up with about this tennis-sized ball as a fitting. At one point, the utility did try to make a point of going to get those fittings and replace them with a compression fitting, a copper to lead kind of compression fitting. So, but if that lead wipe is still there, yes, they have a significant chance of leaking because that joint deteriorates over time. But if that lead wipe has been removed and it's a compression fitting, I'd say it's just about an equal chance or a much lesser chance than that lead wipe.
Nate?
Out of the 825 goosenecks remaining, were we intending to dig up just for the gooseneck on any of them? And that's kind of the question, that is, should we wait until something happens? I gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the short term, we should pivot in the sense that we should pivot away from goosenecks and focus on full services. I think the next question then, though, is do we continue to maintain at the pace we're at, or do we have some flexibility given the other challenges that we're facing and the quantity that we're replacing annually?
Makes sense not to just dig a hole if we don't have to.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I would, I'd be in favor of adjusting the number per year so that it's lower and, like you say, save some cost given the other things we have to think about in terms of cost. But still, what did we say, what's our time frame that we're hoping or we need to do? Is it 10 years?
The overall was 15,
15.
Was what the DNR gave us. Obviously, we've got a pretty good start here.
Start on it.
The additional question then is, after I get done with, if we pivot and get the full services first, do you want that same effort after to continue after goosenecks, or just when we randomly come upon them? I don't know.
We have a little time to firm that
It's something
up.
to think about.
Yes,
Yeah.
no, I agree that that's an important piece, but
Yeah.
we have time.
Yes.
So it sounds like there's consensus for focus on the full service, de-emphasize the gooseneck, except where you
We find it.
come across it, and,
And adjust that.
95 to something is fine per year, instead of pushing the 168. I see lots of nodding.
Yep.
Okay. Does that give you the direction you need?
Yeah, and I want to make sure that, those that are in the community realize we still have the resources online, so they can still go out and check and see if they have a lead gooseneck or a lead service based on the map. If they have questions, they can obviously contact us to find out what their situation is at their home. We're still offering testing, so if they want, even if they have a gooseneck, if they want their water tested, we will test their water for them. We'll work with them to get those test results. And obviously, if we have anything is it 10 part, right now I said the regulations is 15. If anyone tests above 10, we immediately put that as a service that we replace. Fortunately, we have not gotten test results in that ballpark, so it's been very fortunate. But again, we still got to work with the property owners that have lead in any capacity to give them resources to make sure everyone's educated. We know what's going on.
Nick, I know we talked last month or the month before about for the private side, the programs are going to be sunsetted in terms of the grants or whatever, rural vehicle. Is that still the plan? I mean, you haven't heard anything different on that?
Yeah, no, it's all, we'll get to safe drinking water loan a little later as well, but yeah, in general, we've not heard any changes from that, from those programs, and the reimbursement for those customers that still have a lead service on the private side, and I believe there's 115, does that sound right, John? Yeah, they've all been notified, and some of those are commercial, but the residential ones still have until, I believe, construction by April 30th of next year. They still get full reimbursement.
All right, number 10, second review of O&M budget.
Sure, so I'm gonna let Patty kind of kick it off, and then I'll add some more on it.
Okay, so in the second draft, we included a summary of changes, which is the page right after this memo page. For the O&M, we added a little over $8,200 to property insurance for the additional insurance for the new building. That's in the electric expenses and the water expenses. We added a little over $213,000 to water treatment operation, labor and expense. And that is for the PFAS temporary treatment facility. And then the rate of return based on the changes we made, electric decreased just slightly. And then the water rate of return decreased from 2.38 to 1.53. And then another note is that we added, it's page 25 of the O&M budget, but I think it's page 27 of the document, the cash flow summary to show cash flow.
So I thought we'd kind of work through it department by department. So, first department being electric, just based on how the packet's put together, I don't really have anything to add, and thought I'd take any questions that you may have electric specific, and then move into the other departments. So. Hearing none.
Sounds like you're good on electric.
Okay, so then let's move into water, and that's where it gets a little, just want to, I guess, start, we talked about a couple different projects tonight. First of all, lead services, and we'll get into this a little bit on the capital as well. Lead services, we had, still had it high. It had $750,000 sort of roughly in there for lead services, so that number can be adjusted based on the direction you've given us. From a PFAS perspective, we had the temporary facility in there, but also starting engineering and design of a permanent solution in there as well. So those are some numbers that are going to change between now and next time. I'm going to start on page 14 of the PDF, or page 12. It's the water income and statement and rate of return. So you can see at the bottom there, you can look at the rate of return for the last couple of years. You can see how in 2021 our actual increased to 6.25. This year we're estimating 3.98. And you can kind of see, that pivot, if you will, or that change is due to the depreciation as it relates to the water main. Remember last year we weren't able to fully use the $580,000 for water main replacement. So some of those dollars carried over into 22, and that's why if you look at the depreciation line, you'll see that there's a roughly $550,000 increase year over year, and that then affects the net operating income, which then affects the rate of return. So that's the delta there. But then if you look at 23, the budget, obviously you can see a pretty drastic reduction in the rate of return of 1.53%. I think when we look at just the water side, there's about $500,000 of additional expense. First of all, well rehab is about $100,000 higher than it's been in the past. Due to two different things. One, we've normally done 2 wells. Next year we're looking at doing potentially 3 wells. And that's something we'll have to talk about as we look at the PFAS, but that's what we're looking at is 3 wells. In addition, the process for rehabilitation is much more involved based on the recommendations that we've gotten from studies, so it's more costly essentially to do that well rehab compared to historical. There's also $400,000 in there for PFAS treatment for this temporary solution that we just talked about, so that's an unusual expense that we wouldn't normally have. And then the other part is that with all the lead services that we're installing, that increases our depreciation expense. So you can see how that's running a little bit. It's in the rate case around 1.3-ish. You can see we're up to 1.5. Part of that's a slight carryover, but the other part of it can be attributed to lead services as well. So all of those kind of come in and create less income, which then when you do the calculation of income, net operating income divided by your plant base, that rate of return of the 1.53.
Nick, did you say most of that depreciation increase was lead-based?
I don't know if there's definitely there's been water main replacements this year as well that would be attributed to that. I don't think we did any vehicles this year.
No.
There would have been, There'd be some hydrants that were replaced this year that are capitalized. They're pretty small in nature, but I think the lion's share of it would be the lead services. If there's no other questions on the rest of the water, I'm actually going to jump to the cash flow summary, which is labeled as page 25. And it's 27 of the PDF. And it's the one that has the 2 circles on the bottom, the pie chart. So this is the cash flow summary. As you can see, electric and communications are showing a relatively healthy cash return for the year. Obviously, water is where we're seeing a large deficit. Again, that speaks to the $500,000 of additional expenses we just talked about as far as the well rehab and the depreciation and the PFAS treatment. And then if you look at the capital budget, I mean, we'll get into the details in a minute, but you can see that there's $2.6 million in capital. That target really is, our target is 1.3, so we're nearly twice what our target is. However, next year we have $700,000 in the capital budget for the filter sand replacement at the water treatment facility. We have about $62,000 for the temporary PFAS that we just talked about, because some of the temporary we'll actually put in like a concrete pad. There'll be some pipe modifications. Some of that stuff will be capitalized versus expense. And then there's about $500,000 of lead service. It's actually yeah. So if you add that all together, that's about $1.3 million of cash that will be used for capital assets and not for hurting the cash flow. So you also see a line on there for preliminary survey. Preliminary survey is when we do engineering work for a capital project. Given now that we've talked about delaying any permanent solution, that number should go down, but that is something that's in there. Because so what we do is if we next year are doing the design for a building or a project in '24, that gets put into preliminary survey until the project is finalized, and then the dollars get charged to it and eventually be capitalized. So with all that said, if those items that I just mentioned that are somewhat special were not in here, we'd actually see a positive return in cash flow for the department of probably around $300,000. And I threw a lot at you. Keep in mind, based on the decisions and discussions tonight, we will pivot or make modifications to these numbers accordingly.
So this is going to come back next month for a third month? Yep.
Yeah, I think that's the most appropriate way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the last 2 weeks here have been quite active with all the different reports and guidance and things coming back that were new and we weren't aware of. So I don't know if there's any other questions on the O&M budget.
Nick, we have seen rate comparisons for electrical, but I can't remember if we've seen rate comparisons to other areas around here for water. How do we compare rate-wise? Do you know?
It's been a little bit since I looked at it in great detail. I would say on the bell curve, we're probably slightly on the higher end. However, I think that the challenge when it comes to water, electric is electric. Someone else generates it. It's really the rate is indicative of your operations. Water is obviously indicative of our operations, but some of the challenges we face, PFAS, some communities aren't dealing with that. Flood services, some communities aren't dealing with that. Some of them use surface water, so they're taking off of Lake Michigan or other things. So each of them have their differences. So it's a little bit trickier to compare apples to apples when you look at rates from that perspective.
Gotcha.
I don't know, John, if you have anything to add to that.
It's just something simple as, take Stephen's point, they're about the community of our size, but I think they have 4 wells to get the water they need.
Yeah.
Wow.
We need 15. So there's inherent costs there with capital costs and just running expense costs. So, it's you look at them and say, okay, their miles of main is about our size, so they should be about the same source, their groundwater community, right? But because their wells are so much more productive than our alluvial sand wells, it's not really an apples to apples comparison. So that's why it's so hard, because every community is a little bit different in that regard.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and if you look at, I mean, Stevens Point has more of a sand, soil condition. We have clay. If you go up to like the Abbotsford area, I mean, they're drilling really, really deep wells to get, water, and they're having, they have a lot of more challenges than we do to actually get the water. So if you look at it from a cost perspective, I'm guessing their rates are more than ours.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Good question.
Thanks.
Other questions?
There's an Infrastructure Act. Is there any money in there for the temporary solution?
We have applied.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit down the road here.
Okay.
One of the agenda items.
Chapter 2.
Oh, gotcha.
That's
the end of O&M.
For, yeah.
That'll come back next month.
Yep.
So second review of the capital budget next.
Same, format. There's a summary on this page right after this memo page. Just one main thing to the actual budget year, and that was increasing the cost for the pipe and concrete pad for the PFAS treatment, temporary treatment facility, based on the estimates received. And then the other changes are all in the forecast, which is page 9 of the budget, or page 11 of the PDF. And we added some VMware hardware for 2025, Citrix virtual desktop system in 2025. Then we had the PFAS treatment facility at the south side that decreased from 6.5 to a little over 5 million for 2024. And then we added the wildwood replacement for 3.9 in 2025.
So just kind of, I guess, same process here. We'll start with electric. Overall, I think that Tony's brought his budget in line with what our expectations are, what our standards are. 2 million is really for non-power production, and then he has about $200,000 for upgrades to M1 as far as remote osmosis and the cold air buffer VFD upgrade. So that's in line. Obviously, water, the 2.6, like we just mentioned, is about 1.3 million over. But again, that's attributed to the lead, the filter sand replacement, and then the temporary items that were just mentioned. Communication, utilities, holding solid there. And then, as Patty mentioned, the last page of the packet kind of goes through those forecasted major projects. I think electric, as you look forward into the future, many of those are just normal and regular types of items. Obviously, if we get a new load, new economic development, maybe a new factory or something along those lines, that may lead us into an expansion or a new substation, depending on location and demand. And then if we're looking at water, you can see we have the reoccurring replacement of lead services, and then as Patty mentioned, the PFAS treatments that were put in there. Again, based on tonight's discussion, we'll be able to shift some of those around, I think, into different years potentially. But also would plan to, since there are some updates that need to be done, to bring this back next month and welcome any questions you might have.
Questions?
Water doesn't use VMware, just electric does. I wonder why they don't have to get shared, I guess.
Pay for it in their rent.
Oh.
My rent is extensive.
And it's just replacing it, huh? That 300 grand basically. It's
I don't know if making.
not
It's a
cheap.
complete rebuild of the hardware right now. The hardware here in the main server room and the hardware in the water treatment backup facility are dissimilar. They're not the same. And that impacts your high availability that you could use in VMware to basically say the system goes down here. The servers would be automatically spun up and running over there without any downtime. And that's a system built into VMware, but the problem is you have to have similar hardware that matches on both sides.
Gotcha. And it didn't right now, then I take it. Well, wasn't matching. Okay.
Though from risk mitigation, we do have backups and we do have insurance coverage, things of that sort. So if there was some event, while it wouldn't be immediate, there would be ability to get spun back up.
Other questions? Okay, we'll see that again next month. Moving back to number 7 then, to continue talking about water major projects financing.
So, we have engaged Ellers, and actually they put together a financial analysis for us for this meeting. However, given all the pivots that we've done and all the different pieces, it felt it was imperative to pull it because it wouldn't have provided concrete results. So in the write-up that I gave you, just kind of bouncing through those different items, I think we've kind of landed on as far as the filter sand and nozzle replacement and the temporary PFAS solution for next year. And then blood services, looking at the balance of how many of those are completed each year, so we'll make adjustments to the forecast there. I think that the financing options is just something I wanted to talk about at a high level to see what type of options you want us to consider. So I think, you're familiar with the revenue bonds, traditional financing, what we've done for this building, when we refinanced for the power plant for M1. Those are out there. There is an opportunity that we've not taken advantage of, but could be, and it's something just to plant a seed, I guess, is normally we have 60 days, once a resolution is passed to issue bonds by the Common Council, up to 60 days prior, any of those capital costs could be reimbursed through the proceeds of the issuance of the debt. However, there's an opportunity to pass a reimbursement resolution that would extend that window 18 to 36 months. So basically meaning the resolution gets passed tomorrow, the project gets done in a couple of years, all the dollars then can be captured, and then the debt can be issued after the fact, if you will. It's just a tool that it allows some flexibility. I think if you were to look at the bond market right now and go out there, the rates are somewhat 4 to 5%. So if we could, if you could potentially wait a year to maybe 2 years, you might find more favorable rates. So it's just an opportunity there. It's assuming you have cash to help you cover the short-term debt. So it's just one thing to be thinking about as we're looking at this. And then just to note that the current rates are about 1 to 1.5% higher than the safe drinking water loan. And that kind of relates back to Nate's comment about the infrastructure bill. So on the water side, what the federal dollars that are coming through actually go to the state, and then they're part of a safe drinking water loan program. Basically, that's a program that it's the same program that we've been using for the private side lead service replacement. So John actually completed an initial short form application back in October for lead services for the private side, and then 3 of the PFAS solutions. And so the application submitted the short form. Basically, they go through a scoring mechanism, and then in early next year, January, February, we'll find out how our project compares to others and how likely we would be to get funding. And then at that point, we can determine if we want to go through the more involved application process to determine if we want to receive funds. There are, they call it principal forgiveness components to some of these safe drinking water loans. So it's possible we could get some principal forgiveness back on a PFAS solution, which is obviously advantageous. I was trying to find it before this meeting, but I think there was only $11 million allocated at the state level for PFAS. And between all the communities that I keep hearing, and those dollars have to be spread across 5 years, I'm thinking the amount that they might put out is relatively small. The other challenge with it is that you have to, the interest rate is fixed by the state. So when you get a safe drinking water loan, it's a 20-year or 30-year term. The interest rate is set and the repayment's set. There's no advance payment you have to pay on that schedule. You have to Buy American and Davis-Bacon wages apply, and that can add about a 20% increase to the overall cost of the project. So if you had a $5 million project and you get a $1 million Davis-Bacon or a $1 million safe drinking principal forgiveness, well, that really gets eaten up by the fact that you've got to pay higher wages and pay Buy American items. So that has to be weighed. There's also additional administrative oversight due to these extra requirements. And we'd also, we would have to confirm with the state that they would allow the funds to be in a junior position, because essentially we have existing debt, and this would have to be taken in a junior position allowing the existing debt to take primary for funds being available. So that's one funding source that's out there. And then the last fund, so we've got the revenue bonds, we've got the safe drinking water fund loan opportunities, and then the last one is the, if we were to consider some type of internal transfer of funds between departments, where we would set a nominal interest rate. I think that's the advantage of doing this financial analysis, because you could then see what the cash holdings are by department and get a sense for how doing some transfer in between, how that would impact financials for both electric and water and cash holdings. Obviously, the positive to doing that is you don't have issuance costs, you don't have, the interest rate can be whatever the commission determines. There's a number of advantages that way. Downside is obviously if we need to go out for debt, or we have another large capital project for the electric utility and the waters are tied up, sorry, the funds are tied up by water, then that puts you in a position where you may have to issue debt on the electric side. So it's balancing all those things. So giving you guys a lot to think about there. Just, I guess, trying to get a sense from you if an analysis is needed. Is it something we can wait a little while on? We want to see it. We'll bring the budgets back next month. Is this something that would be supportive in the budgets that you want to look at to say, the $700,000 for the filter sand we want to get some debt for, or the lead services we want to issue debt for, or if you want to use cash. So it's a lot there, but just trying to get a sense for which options you guys want to look at and when you'd like to see it.
Thoughts?
Always nice to have options.
How much are you thinking? Like, is it about that 2.2 million?
Yeah.
Well, I think what we would do is we would, they would do a 20-year forecast. So we would look at, and actually it'd be 20 years for the length of the debt. So some of these projects might be a year or two out. So it might be a 20 or 25-year forecast. And we would put each one of them in there. I think at a high level, the easiest way to do it is to say, all right, we're going to do revenue bonds for everything, or we're going to do safe drinking water loan for everything, or we're going to do internal for everything. Trying to mix and match can be done. It's just a little bit, we'd have to know those criteria or how you want to slice which bucket.
And bonds are about 4% right now, roughly?
Correct. That's what the initial analysis is.
Okay.
And I think the safe drinking water loan was about 2.9 is what he gave us in the initial numbers.
We get about 3% right now on our money that's sitting out there that we would lend, right? Roughly 3%?
Honestly, we actually just issued a CD where it was 4.25%, I believe, and for the first year, and then it actually ratchets up to 6% for the next 4. However, it is callable, so I would expect it to get called. But so yeah, we are doing that one. But our holdings with Forward is 2.25, and LGIP just went up to 2.91.
I think you hit it on the head though, Nate. I mean, is this really a source of funds issue, or is this more of where are we going to get the best interest rate, and what's going to happen to interest rates over the next 3 years, 5 years, 25 years? I mean, beyond a few years, I think that analysis is going to be pretty useless forecasting interest rates.
Bonds you can pay off earlier, or you have to pay the interest if you do that.
Traditional revenue bonds, I think, is a 10-year callable, so 10 years. I totally respect your point, and I think it's really just understanding, all right, what our cash holdings are, what our targets are for that, and how does our actual cash compare to those values, and understanding how that fits into some of these projects as well.
as we look at the options, do the various options have different impacts on, say, rates, future rates for the customers?
So the principal and interest is typically is below the line.
Yeah.
So that's taken out of the below the line, I guess. Ultimately, all of them are based on the capitalization cost, and that whatever capitalization is, that's the depreciation that customers pay on. So the more expensive that side of it is, the actual capital. But I guess that wouldn't necessarily change based on the funding source.
It would have been nice a year or two ago if we had to make some sort of a decision on financing. But interest rates are higher now, and they will be higher next year too. So if there's an alternative to financing other than that, I'd give Libby a wait on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can easily pull together the three big options, I guess, bonds, safe drinking, and then internal fund transfers, and just give it a nominal interest rate for analysis, and that way you can at least see.
That'd be helpful, yeah.
And it's I don't know how many tabs are in that spreadsheet that he gives us, but each one of those would have like 30 different tabs, but I'll try to provide you like a summary table looking at impact on rates, impact on cash holdings, things of that sort, just to give you a high-level comparison to, I guess, the big differences between them. I think what you'll find is that from the water perspective, for revenue bond, safe drinking water loan, or internal transfer, if you put some nominal interest rate, it's going to be relatively similar. Ultimately, they're going to be, it's really the electric side is if you're going to, obviously the revenue bond, safe drinking water doesn't impact the electric side. It's really if you did an internal transfer that's going to change its cash holdings. It's going to be paid out to support some of this debt until it's repaid. Prior to the challenges we're faced with lead and PFAS, I mean, we've done very well over the last 5 years as it relates to cash holdings on the water side. When I started in this position, we were at about, if my memory serves correctly, about a 1.3 deficit from the water to the electric. And prior to the start of last year, we were about a 3.2 million positive, so about a $5 million swing in a matter of 5 years, but obviously making sure that we had good cost control and budgets and such. However, prior results are not necessarily totally reflective of future results.
You sound like a mutual fund owner.
I think you're entering a heavy investment cycle on the water side with the big projects that we've got going. And I think the project you're describing, Nick, while you're approaching it from the water perspective, is really an electric analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're right, from the water side, they're going to need to borrow funds, whether they borrow them in the market or whether they borrow them from electric. So it's really an investment decision on the electric utilities part, whether we've got a better alternative investment for the electric utility or whether we should loan those funds to water so that they don't have to pay a market rate, because that would then be in the best interest of our ratepayer.
Right, and I want to be clear that at the end of the day, regardless of whatever three options you choose, the water rates are essentially the same.
Mm-hmm.
They don't get, no matter if you use cash, completely cash, or if you go out and get a debt, it's all, the repayment of that debt or transfer back is all below the line. It doesn't, the end customer is going to pay the same rate regardless. I think it's a hard concept, to think about, because normally that's not how most people think when they think about financials and taking out debt. But that's how the state and the PSC and how it's set up, configured.
Would additional bonding affect like the Moody's rating or anything like that, and affect other city debt that they take on?
It would in the the bank qualified limit, the $10 million of debt issued by the city in an annual year. It limits the number of potential bidders on the debt, and therefore you might see a slight premium as it relates to that issuance. I do know the city is, I don't know, 3-ish, 4-ish million annually, I think does that sound right? Ish. And then I know that the wastewater treatment facility, I think, is looking at some projects in the coming years as well. So there might be an appetite to try to combine all these into 1 year. So there's a larger issuance, and that way instead of it hitting the city in multiple years and them seeing a slight premium for their debt.
So we could save some money there, but cost us more in the long run, potentially, if I heard you correctly. Or it could cost us more if we went that route.
It'd be the same for us. It'd be the city's debt issuance annually that would be impacted by them spreading it across multiple years where they increase that 10 million, or they exceed that 10 million cap.
Other questions? Did we give you any direction there?
I'll put together an analysis and get you guys to look at the different, I think having numbers in front of you would help with this conversation.
Yeah.
At least than me trying to verbalize it.
Maybe just a couple numbers instead of 30 tabs worth?
30 tabs times how many, like 6 different solutions.
All right. Moving on, number 12, a discussion of future commission meeting dates. I think you all got to see this write-up that we're looking at making a change to discussing a change to the third Monday instead of the first Monday, or whatever we're at the second
Monday.
Yeah.
Okay. Two-third from the second.
For 3 to 6 months.
Well, you could change the policy and make it permanent, or we could try it out for 3 to 6 months. Your choice.
Well, I checked my calendar and it makes no difference to me. It's 30 days.
Okay.
Makes no difference, yes. How does it impact the staff and yourself, Nick?
That should be fine.
And I know you had talked about, the school and all that kind of, the third being better. For how long a period do you see it being better? Are you going to switch in January when a new semester starts, or is there?
It's off for the summer, so like July, August, September. I believe July and August for sure anyways. And then so 18 months from now it would be over though.
College months over. And not that I'm saying we need to switch back, it's just,
Yeah. If it's impacting you guys negatively at all, I just to make it work.
The second or the third, both work well.
And then if there is a conflict on the third Monday, that leaves us open to go back to the second Monday for a meeting in case some other meetings come up. Okay.
So I guess what I heard, Nate, is through June's meeting would be advantageous at this point.
Yeah,
For 6 months.
that'd be great.
Or whatever, that would be 7 months.
7 months.
7 months.
So you want to propose a 7-month trial? Is
I'll
that what I
propose a
heard?
7-month trial, make a motion that we have a 7-month trial of meeting on the third Monday of each month, starting in December.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Any other discussion?
And then at the end of the time, we can make it permanent or
Or we can go back.
go
back.
backwards.
Discuss it
When we
then.
get to June, we go over and look at it again.
Motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion
Thanks.
carries.
Thanks, guys.
MU building update.
Yes, so progress continues on the garage. Everything's coming together for substantial completion in early December. I think you've probably noticed the asphalt when you park today in the line, so that's all coming together. Landscaping is it's obviously ongoing as well. And I think right now, there might be some items that are carried over into next year. Obviously, punch list items, landscaping. If anything doesn't grow, we get a period of time if it dies, we can get it replaced. And then in the back, unfortunately, there will be, they put the first layer of asphalt down, but as you know, there's usually 2 layers. And the second layer, they needed the temperature to be warmer than it was. They were trying to finish city road projects and put us after them. And weather just didn't quite cooperate. So that'll be something that'll be done in the spring or when the weather allows.
Questions? Comments? Thank you, Nick. Job orders.
Yes, we have one job order tonight for consideration. It is Highway E, a single-phase rebuild. It's on Highway E north of Turtle Ridge Road. It's replacing poles, conductors, and all the related hardware and equipment along Highway E, along with some underground as well. The estimate or the total job order cost was $148,585. We had $121,000 in the budget, and we'll use funds from the miscellaneous, along with, we had another project, the Chase Reed one, which is actually going to be carried over to next year's budget, or was in the capital budget that was presented this evening.
Motion to approve the job order singular
Make the motion.
by Harry,
Approved.
Second.
second by Nate. Questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Bills and payroll.
Bills have been reviewed and are certified good for payment.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the bills and payroll?
So moved.
By Nate,
I'll second.
second by Paul. Questions? Yes, Nate.
Payroll is at 9%, normally it's 4 or 5. Is that just from the Florida?
I believe so.
Other questions? We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Previous meeting minutes from the meeting of October 10th. Is there a motion to approve those?
I so moved.
John, second. Paul, any corrections to entertain? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Financial reports.
They included for this month are the September financial statements and October cash reports. Any questions?
Anybody have questions for Patty? Seeing none, item 18 is approval to go into closed session per Wisconsin State Statute 19.851E, deliberating and negotiating purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business, wherever competitive or bargaining reasons require closed session, specifically discussing water office facility. In closed session per Wisconsin State Statute 19.851C, consider employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, specifically discuss personnel update. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Paul, second by John. This is a roll call vote. Harry, would you call the vote, please?
Yes. Mr. Ebro? Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Schneider? Yes. Mr. Kaplan?
Yes.
And Mr. Borgman is a yes.
That motion passes. We will recess for 5 minutes. Go clear the room. Thank you.